The final line of code flickered on the monitor, steady and complete. Ava Reynolds pressed the Enter key and leaned back as the application compiled without a single error. It was her first project, and it worked exactly as planned. Around her, the office hummed with the energy of payday. Her colleagues were already planning their weekends, exchanging brochures for high-end apartments and listing the features of new vehicles they intended to buy. Ava looked at the screen, then at her bank balance, and finally at the empty desk surface. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a worn notebook. She did not look at the luxury car advertisements taped to the wall near the break room. She opened the notebook to a fresh page and picked up a pen. She wrote one sentence in firm, dark ink. Financial freedom before 40. She closed the book and set it aside. The screen continued to glow, reflecting in her eyes, but her focus had shifted. While the room filled with talk of immediate gratification, she sat in the quiet, watching the cursor blink, already calculating the cost of the path she had just chosen to walk. The next morning, the glass storefront of the dealership caught the early sun, casting reflections of polished metal across the sidewalk. Ava walked past the entrance without slowing her pace. She ignored the showroom windows and the sales staff standing by the display cars. Instead, she turned the corner and stood at the bus stop, waiting until the heavy doors hissed open. She climbed the steps, paid her fare, and found a seat in the back. Every month, the routine repeated. The moment her paycheck hit her account, she moved a fixed percentage into an investment fund. It was an automated, emotionless transfer. Then, she paid her rent and bought groceries. Nothing else. No upgrades, no impulsive purchases. She watched her bank balance fluctuate, but she saw it as a tool rather than a reward. While others sought comfort in immediate consumption, she found her security in the steady accumulation of capital. She treated her finances like a software architecture, building layers of resilience one deposit at a time. The system ran in the background of her life, silent and precise, ensuring that every dollar served a purpose beyond the present moment. By the second year, the social landscape had shifted. Her colleagues were posting photos of sun-drenched resorts and dinners at high-end restaurants. Ava saw these images on her phone, then set the device face down on the library table. The library was her sanctuary, a quiet space filled with the scent of old paper and dust. She spent her weekends working through thick volumes on market volatility and asset allocation. Outside, the world moved with a frantic pace of consumption. Inside, she traced the history of economic cycles. The silence was heavy at first, a physical pressure that reminded her of the social circles she was choosing to leave behind. She watched the sunlight crawl across the table, marking the hours she spent alone. There were moments when the isolation felt sharp, yet every chapter she finished replaced that uncertainty with clarity. She was building a mental architecture that her peers could not see. She closed the book, the thud of the cover echoing in the quiet aisle. She did not have the tan or the memories of the resorts, but as she packed her bag, she felt a different kind of weight, the steady, quiet power of a mind that knew exactly how the system worked. Monday morning arrived with the usual bustle of the corporate parking lot. Ava pulled her sedan into the furthest spot, the engine sputtering, before finally falling silent. As she stepped out, a group of coworkers gathered near the entrance, their voices carrying over the hum of the morning traffic. One of them pointed toward her car, a rusted fender catching the light, and whispered something that triggered a sharp, dismissive smirk from the others. They glanced at her, their expressions a mix of pity and condescension. Ava heard the low murmur of their laughter, but she did not break her stride. She reached into her pocket, felt the cold weight of her keys, and kept her eyes fixed on the office building ahead. The social currency they valued, the status of a new model or the shine of a fresh exterior, meant nothing to her. She walked past them, her pace steady and deliberate, leaving their whispers to fade behind her. She did not need to defend her choices. Every dollar she saved was a brick in a wall she was building for her future. She pushed through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, leaving the parking lot drama behind, and turned her focus entirely toward the screen waiting on her desk and the growth of her portfolio. The fifth year arrived with a sudden, violent shift in the financial landscape. It started as a ripple on the monitor's red lines plummeting downward in erratic, jagged patterns. Within an hour, the office floor transformed. Laptops clicked rapidly, voices rose in volume, and the air grew thick with the sharp scent of stale coffee and rising tension. Ava sat at her station, watching the same numbers turn crimson. Her own account balance dropped, shedding thousands in a matter of minutes. Across the row, a coworker gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white, his eyes wide as he hammered a sell order into his terminal. He shouted to the room about the bottom falling out. Others scrambled to follow, their movements frantic and uncoordinated, desperate to salvage what remained of their holdings. Ava watched the cursor blink. The panic was infectious, a physical force pulling at the edges of her focus. She felt the dip in her own net worth, a tangible loss that sat heavy in her chest. Outside the window, the city traffic continued as if nothing had changed. But inside, the floor felt like it was tilting. She kept her hands still, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard, refusing to join the rush toward the exit. The panic around her reached a crescendo, but Ava closed the browser tabs showing the news feeds and the frantic chat rooms. She opened her investment portal. The screen was a sea of red, a digital graveyard for the portfolios of her peers. She did not look at the coworkers still shouting about losses. She looked at the price per share. It was lower than it had been in 3 years. Her breath slowed to a steady rhythm. She typed the ticker symbols with surgical precision. The numbers were not losses to her, they were entry points. She hit the buy button, then confirmed. She did it again. Each click was a deliberate act of defiance against the fear gripping the room. Her account balance surged as she allocated the cash she had hoarded for years. She watched the orders process, the execution confirmations appearing like lines of clean, functioning code. The portfolio was not just growing, it was being refined. The chaos of the market had become her mechanism for accumulation. She leaned back, her hands finally leaving the keyboard, and watched the system run. She had turned the dip into her own foundation. She was no longer just saving for a goal. She was actively dictating the terms of her future. 10 years of rhythm had hardened her daily routine into a machine. Ava sat at the head of the row, her screen crowded with complex architectural diagrams and endless debugging logs. The project was a beast, demanding 16-hour days that left the rest of the team slumped in their chairs, eyes bloodshot and coffee cups stacked like barricades. A manager paced the aisle, his voice sharp with the pressure of looming deadlines, demanding more speed and more output. Ava typed, her fingers moving with a mechanical, relentless pace that matched the server's hum. The office air was recycled and cold, smelling of stale dust and ozone. She felt the weight of the corporate grind pulling at her posture, the same exhaustion that had hollowed out her colleagues. Yet, when the manager turned away, she flicked a single key to pull up a hidden tab. A spreadsheet filled the screen. It did not contain code or project timelines. It contained the results of a decade of discipline. She scrolled through the columns, interest rates, cumulative dividends, and the steady, upward slope of her portfolio. The numbers were quiet, steady, and entirely independent of the frantic energy surrounding her. She closed the tab, adjusted her chair, and turned back to the code, her focus sharpening as she looked at her bank account's silent, growing power. The office lights flickered, casting long, tired shadows over the desks. Ava ignored the shouting from the conference room. She reached for her mouse and clicked the refresh icon on her personal spreadsheet. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse, before the data recalculated. The final cell updated, the numbers shifting to reveal the sum, $1,002,412. She stared at the digits. She refreshed the page again, just to be sure. The number held steady. The weight of 10 years of missed vacations, empty weekends, and silent discipline vanished in a heartbeat. Her shoulders dropped. The tightness in her jaw, held for a decade, simply evaporated. She looked around the room, seeing the rows of people trapped in the same loop she had just broken. A manager walked past, his face tight with stress, but he was a ghost to her now. She was no longer a participant in their frantic, bottom-line obsessed world. She checked the numbers one last time, ensuring every cent was accounted for. Her breathing deepened. The air in the office, previously stale and oppressive, felt different. She had reached the target. She had outrun the system. She was finished. Ava stood up. She did not save her work. She did not close the browser windows. She simply pushed her chair back, the wheels rolling silently against the floor. Every step toward the manager's office felt like a severance of a tether. She passed the desks of developers who were still hunched over their keyboards, oblivious to the fact that they were looking at someone who had already left. She reached the glass door, knocked once, and pushed it open. Her manager looked up, his brow furrowed with the pending deadline. Ava didn't wait for him to speak. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded resignation letter, and placed it directly onto the center of his desk. He looked at the paper, then back at her, his expression shifting from annoyance to pure, unadulterated shock. He opened his mouth, likely to protest, but Ava turned on her heel before he could form a single word. She walked back through the office, her pace even, and deliberate. She did not look at the screens. She did not look at the faces of her colleagues. She reached the main exit, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped into the hallway, leaving the entire mechanism behind her without a single backward glance. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind her, sealing off the humming fluorescent world. Ava stepped onto the sidewalk and stopped. The mid-afternoon sun hit her face, warm and unfiltered. She stood there for a long moment, simply breathing. There were no meetings scheduled, no code to deploy, no deadlines looming on a calendar. She looked up at the sky, watching the clouds move without the urgency of a ticking clock. A bus pulled up to the curb, the same route she had taken for years, but she didn't move toward it. She watched the doors open and close, then watched it pull away, leaving the street empty again. She reached into her pocket, felt the absence of her security badge, and let her hand fall to her side. The pavement under her feet felt solid. For the first time in a decade, every direction was an option. She turned left, away from the office, and walked into the crowd. She was not running toward anything. She was simply moving through a world she finally owned. She took another deep breath, felt the air settle in her lungs, and kept walking. The rhythm of her footsteps matched the steady pulse of her own life.